So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is John Kareko, and I serve as a technical advisor for Southwest Indian Ocean Tuna Forum. And my interest management of complex natural resource systems, which are adaptive, and fisheries is one, and also coming on board as the biodiversity beyond the national jurisdiction is also another complex area of management that we need to be dealing with. I'll be your moderator today for this meeting. So we begin by getting to know why we are here. And we are here for this webinar to enlighten us on more on BBNJ or the biodiversity beyond our national jurisdiction. And we are going to do it in a simple way. We start by introducing ourselves, and by introducing ourselves, I would urge each one of us to write their name on the chat and the organizations where they are coming from, and also the country from which they come from, because it's good to get to see the diverse members who are listening and how we are working as a regional team. So I would also urge us to have our microphone muted as we move on with the webinar. Then when we come to questions or any issue, we request us to raise our hand and then will be considered. Then we also ask people who have questions as we proceed with the webinar. Please put your questions into the chat and we can visit the questions as we come to the conclusion of our webinar. So we'll look at those questions and answer them. So we'll have probably three presenters. One was, and then we'll have our question and answer, and then we'll close the meeting. It will be as simple as that. To start us off is we need to ask ourselves why we found the need to have this webinar. And we know that we are now getting into a new era where we have a new agreement for managing the areas that are not within any national jurisdiction. Because in the earlier time, we have been having management based on the law of the seas, but now we needed an agreement on how do we implement that so that at least each country can have a fair share of what is happening out there in the sea. We also need to put into consideration the importance of interconnectivity, because whatever happens out there in the open seas also affect what happens within the continental shelf and areas where we dwell in our fisheries. We also need to know that also what we do within the continental shelf or areas that we really interact with also affects whatever happens within the open seas. So with this agreement, again, we will need to get to see how that connects. And with that connection also, we also need to know that the other parameters that are active within these areas, how do we interact with them? I also want to bring into attention that when we are looking at the BBNJ, we are not just looking at fisheries alone. There are also other parameters that are linked with it. But our focus today will be more on the fishery sector because that's what directly affects us. So we need to really get to know or explore the implication of the BBNJ agreement on our region. How are we doing? And how are we interacting with the BBNJ process? And also in consideration to our sector, how will it affect us when it really comes to the implementation of BBNJ? We should also get to know that out of this, each one of us has a role to play. And we need to be clear beforehand what our role is and prepare for it, build capacity for it. And then as the implementation takes place, then we are able to actively and effectively contribute into the implementation of the agreement. We are also aware that the agreement came into force in 17th January of this year, that is 2026. And we are lucky that a number of countries within the Southwest Indian Ocean countries have ratified, that is Kenya, Tanzania, Comoros, and Madagascar. But we also have other countries like Malawi, which has also ratified. So maybe as we go through the webinar today, we might get to know how countries that are landlocked come into being. And I think that will be of value. So with that introduction, I think we need now to engage with the presenters. I said we have three presenters. One, we have Jeremy uh, Brugin, who Jeremy has been in this process for quite a long time since I got to know him. And he comes from Seychelles, where he deals with conservation and especially with the Alliance of Small Island States, and has been the director of the Small Island States Alliance Fellowship. And currently, Jeremy is based in Italy, working on the same as the director for we call it OASIS in short. But Jeremy has been in this process before, and he was in IUCN, where his role was senior program officer and focusing mainly on BBNJ agreement. And in his focus, his aim was to assist 11 East and Southern African countries in ratifying and implementing the BBNJ agreement when it comes to force. So Jeremy is also an alumni of the Alliance of Small Island States Fellowship, and he served as a climate change and ocean advisor in Seychelles, and also permanent mission to the United Nations, where he contributed to the national climate and ocean and law negotiations. And before that, he coordinated the project in communications for the Seychelles Island Foundation and contributed to national environmental policy. Jeremy also owns a BSc degree in international relations, honors, and in environmental geography from the University of Cape Town. And he has also a diploma in environmental management from the University of Brazil. So Jeremy has really been in this process of BBNJ, and he is well suited to really explain to us where we have come from and where we are and where we are going, so that at least we can have readiness when it comes to the implementation of BBNJ. Then the other presenter we have is Dr. Bianca Haas. Bianca Haas comes from Australia. She's a senior research fellow at the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resource and Security, which we call ANCAS. And we have been working in collaboration with them for quite a while now. She completed a PhD at the University of Tasmania in 2021, where her research was examining the interactions between regional fisheries management organizations, which we call the ALIMOs, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Bianca has also done research on broadly focusing on equity and governance and the challenges that face transboundary fisheries, in particular with emphasis of tuna fisheries and Indian Ocean, in the Indian Ocean and Western and Central Pacific. Our work explores how international legal and institutional framework can better support equitable and sustainable fisheries management across various jurisdictions. Our current research interests include the evolving role of RIVMOs in the content of the Agreement on the Biodiversity Bionational Jurisdiction, and the allocation of international fisheries, the integration of small-scale fishers into the regional management frameworks, and the labor conditions for fisheries crews. At the moment, those are the speakers we are going to hear from today. And given time and possible, we may have Dr. Davis Makira, who is the Director of Fisheries and Blue Economy at the State Department for the Blue Economy. And he is currently the focal point of BBNJ, where he would really give us hints on where we are as Kenya and where we are going. He's also the lead of the Ocean Conference, on which is coming very soon. So hopefully if he is able to attend, then we'll incorporate him into the process. So with that, I would now invite Jeremy to give us the highlights on BBNJ process. That is where we are going, and how we get there. So Jeremy, you have at least 20 minutes to give your presentation, and then we will note the questions that may come, and then maybe those will be answered at the end of the webinar. So Jeremy, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to join you all this morning. Am I audible? Just wanted to make sure.
Yes, you are audible on my side.
Yes, you are.
Excellent. And I'm hoping my the slides are showing.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, good morning, good day, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join you. My name is Jeremy Again, and again, thank you, John, for giving my background. And yes, I'm joining you today more in a personal capacity as someone who's worked in the region for IUCN for Eastern and Southern African Regional Office. But I am also working with the Alliance of Somalian States, which represents 37 UN member states on various issues, including climate change, BBNJ, and sustainable development issues. So today's presentation, what I really want to try and do is explain about where we are and what's next. And to do so, I'll try and provide a little bit of context. It'll be quite general in the sense. Then I want to focus on the work of the BBNJ preparatory commissions, the PrepCom as it's commonly referred to. And then I want to dive a little bit into the next steps and the road to COP1. So let's get on with it. So just to give a bit of context, I think what we need to just pay attention to is the reason why we're talking about the BBNJ, and then think about the current 2026 picture that we're in. And I think to really focus our minds on what the BBNJ agreement is meant to do is really to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. This is almost 50% of the Earth's planet, 2/3 of our ocean. What's important to also realize is this is a beacon of hope for multilateralism, and it really underlines this in its objective, where it speaks to the international cooperation and coordination that's needed. This is the third implementing agreement of UNCLOS. It's been a mission for us to get where we are right now, but we know we need it. What you're seeing on the screen paints a clear picture when it comes to the uses of our ocean. If you look at all those graphs, there's exponential increases when we're talking about the use of shipping, when we think about marine genetic resources, when we think about deep sea minerals, desalinization. All these activities, even including protection, is on an increase when we talk about our ocean. And as you look to the side where you see this cover page for The Economist, I can be assured that all of us are really aware of how volatile our world is right now, whether it's conflicts in Ukraine, between Israel and Palestine, in the Strait of Hormuz. We are in a very geopolitically tense moment, and multilateralism is very much in a crisis point. Yet we have the BBNJ agreement. And I think as we go through the discussion about the PrepCom and what's next for the first COP, it's important to really bear that in mind, because we don't live in a vacuum. We clearly are being affected by the influence of geopolitics and the interests and positions of great powers in this context. Just to really sharpen the mind again, I think it's important to realize from this map, you can see we have about 145 signatories to the BBNJ agreement, and about 89 parties if you include the European Union. And this map shows really the spread of those parties pretty much across all regions are represented. And although we're 89 parties, the hope is to further increase this. And I think as we get to COP1, we'll see countries that are usually large contributors to the BBNJ agreement, such as the UK and Germany, join. But we already have France and China, two members of the Permanent Five, and other particularly important financial contributors such as Japan or South Korea that are parties to the agreement. And it's important to realize that, because we need universal ratification, but also need ratification from key players in our ocean and our multilateralism space. When we focus on Africa, it's important to realize that it has 36 signatories and 18 parties, and there's still 18 parties to engage with the process as a party, in a sense of we have now moved away from the signatory process. So it's important to realize Africa is 54 countries that usually represents over a quarter of the UN General Assembly. So while 18 parties is a significant number, it has not yet fully reached its potential to have that influence in the BBNJ as it could. So it's important for us to realize as Africans, as those of us maybe in Eastern and Southern Africa, it's really important to realize how much power the continent has when it moves together. And, although I've been working with the Alliance of Smaller States, when I was with the Seychelles Permanent Mission to the United Nations, working within the BBNJ delegation of Seychelles, it was really vital to see ourselves within the African group push forward a principle of common heritage of humankind. And so as I talk about the ratification and status of it, it's important for us to realize that the continent needs to be present in these meetings. As we look towards COP1, that's very important. Just a quick note about this slide. I have modified what is a High Seas Alliance slide just to paint a picture of the process of how long it's been taking us to get here. So my acknowledgement to the High Seas Alliance for most of the slide, and my additions really start from 2024. But I really wanted to kind of paint a picture of, one, how long it's been taking. This has been over 2 decades of work for the international system, for member states of the UN, for NGOs and academia and other technical and other support. And so we find ourselves now in 2026 with the conclusion of PrepCom 3 in April. But you can see there's been several years of the PrepCom, and I'll get into details of that. But before that, we had the intergovernmental conferences, which really started in 2018. and really gave us the text of the agreement that we're all working with now. We are now in a place, and I'd like to answer questions in terms of what I asked early. So if you see that red arrow, you can see we are somewhere between the end of PrepCom 3 and the first COP, which is slated for January 2027. We just moving a little bit forward here. We really need to understand that the PrepCom, and it's got this very long name, which I won't repeat here, but it's really established in 2024, in April 2024, to help UN member states prepare for the agreement's entry into force and its first COP. The PrepCom is open to all UN member states, specialized agencies, and unclosed parties. And there's eligible organizations such as intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and entities such as those from academia or the private sector that can participate in its meetings in an observer capacity. It's important to realize that the PrepCom worked underneath the same procedural rules as the intergovernmental conferences that took place from 2018 to 2023. And as mentioned a little bit before, but just to kind of point it out here, those parties that could vote has got to a place where up until January 17th, it was only signatories or those who have ratified that have the state's vote. So, sorry, apologies. Let me backtrack on it. Only after the entry into force, which was January 17th, 2026, could those who are signatories and ratified member states to the agreement could vote on the agreement, on the Preparatory Commission's process. We're now in a stage where the Preparatory Commission has started to make its recommendations and provide a report for the COP1. And it's important to realize that the Commission will only officially cease to exist at the conclusion of COP1. I think it's just important to contextualize things and realize that other regimes, such as, let's say, the UNFCCC, had COP1s that lasted more than a year. So we'll see how COP1 plays out, but it's important to realize when we look at the history, COP1 isn't necessarily just one meeting per se. Maybe it is resumed and paused in a sense and resumed in other parts of the year. We'll see what happens with this COP. But yes, the Preparatory Commission had an organizational meeting in 2024 that began underlining the key issues that would be considered. And it also placed in mind when the meetings would take place. So we've had 3 meetings of the Preparatory Commissions, 3 sessions, each lasting about 2 weeks that have taken place between April 2025, August 2025, and then March and April 2026 was the last one. The key issues that the PrepCom really dealt with was the rules of procedures for the conference of parties, the terms of reference for the subsidiary bodies, the relationship between the BBNJ Secretariat and the UN Secretariat, the seat selection of the BBNJ Secretariat, the clearinghouse mechanisms, operationalization, the cooperation frameworks between institution frameworks and bodies. I mean, we can think of the RFMOs, or we can think of the International Seabed Authority, just to name a few. The reporting requirements, the financial rules, the funding arrangements with the Global Environmental Facility, which is one of the mechanisms that the BBNJ agreement will have financing from and already has financing from when it comes to ratification and early implementation. Also, the operationalization of a special fund, which has a lot of tension on it, but we see that moving forward. And the voluntary trust fund, which is focused on the participation of member states, as well as assessed contributions, which is, again, vital for implementation of this agreement. It's important to now know that where we are in June 2026, that the BBNJ Preparatory Commission has successfully adopted its final report. An advanced unedited version can be found on the website. And you can see from that document that there's been, in its annexes, 10 harmonized draft texts that are for the COP1's consideration and adoption. So the areas of consensus and where we see some movement is on the draft rules of procedure. We can see that when it comes to decision making, there's been quite a high bar set. Also, there's discussion around observer accreditation paths. And really, it's still a place where I think there's a lot of transparency, a lot of accountability created, as well as a greater sense of really needing to achieve consensus, but not necessarily being blocked by consensus if need be. So there's these balancing acts that are shown in this draft text. We also saw that there was quite a bit of movement on subsidiary bodies. Just to give a bit of a background, the subsidiary bodies are seen as quite essential to the BBNJ agreement's implementation. We see the scientific and technical body, which will be essential for environmental impact assessments or the areas-based management tools, including marine protected areas, having a lot of discussions on its terms of reference being moved forward. But across the board, much of what was focused on was the number of members that would sit on these bodies, ensuring there's regional representation, but also representation from other categories of countries, such as small and developing states, such as least developing countries, and landlocked developing countries. So whether it was the STB, the Capacity Building and Transfer of Marine Technology Committee, the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee, the only one that had already had a number of seats agreed upon, the Implementation and Compliance Committee, also the Finance Committee. Apologies, this is not on here, but it is one of those things where discussions really revolved around representation and thinking a bit of the ways in which experts are nominated and participate in their own expert capacity, and really think about the politics that these key subsidiary bodies have when it comes to implementation, trying to avoid politics where possible. It's important to note one area that shows a bit of, I would say, a lack of consensus of where we are with the parties is when it came to institutional options. So how the BBNJ Secretariat will fit inside the UN system or not. So whether the Secretariat will be institutionally linked to the UN or operate under a separate relationship of the agreement. There's been several models that had been given, for example, the International Seabed Authority model, which sees itself as quite a separate entity to the UN in many ways, but still part of the family. Or something like the UNFCCC Secretariat, which is very much within the remit of the UN system. These discussions, these institutional options, which have entered a very advanced stage and quite a complex stage, is also linked to a bit of where the Secretariat seat will be. And we know there are three countries bidding for the Secretariat seat: Belgium, Chile, and China. I think what's also important to realize, there's been approved financial rules, and a draft MOU with the GEF Council. When we think about financial mechanism and the funding rules, this is quite essential to move things forward. There's also been a blueprint to establish an ad hoc committee after COP1 for the special funds operationalization. And we also saw the finalized terms of reference for the voluntary trust fund, which is, again, very important for the attendance of delegates from LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS. We also see a lot of key principles, core principles for reporting being agreed, when we understand that the COP meetings should be one that is really allowing this transparency, is allowing for greater participation when we think about multilingualism, and really ensuring that every member state and other observers are able to really take part and understand what's taking place within this process. Some key next steps that we need to think about when we are going into this stage, from, I would say, the nearing the end of the PrepCom's work and going into the beginning of COP1. One, it's important to note that the PrepCom officially recommended to the UNSG Secretary General that COP1 should be convened from January 11th to 22nd of 2027 at the UN HQ. A particularly cold time of year in New York, I have to add. And really, there's importance to realize around how much member states are thinking about this participation. It's going to be a big moment, so it's something to really think about from your sectors in terms of sending representation. It's something I would already say we're about 6 months away to definitely consider and definitely think about quite heavily. In lieu of the first COP, I think what's been important to realize is the PrepCom has been entrusted to take on several intersessional action agenda items. So one is the clearinghouse mechanism, ensuring that through consultations with the Bureau, with the UN Division of Law of the Seas, of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Seas, really ensuring that this clearinghouse mechanism, which provides information sharing, which is essential to the BBNJ agreement's implementation, really get into the operationalization of this information sharing platform before COP1. Also, the PrepCom has requested to this UN Secretary General to submit a concrete proposal prior to COP1 outlining the administrative and logistical support of the UN can provide to a future secretariat. I think it's also important to realize that the UNSG elections are taking place. So although this SG is leaving, he will have a considerable role to play when we think about the COP1, which will be overseen in a different SG's mandate. So just relaying a little bit of that importance there. Hopefully we can discuss that later. We also saw that, and this came out a little bit more in the PrepCom 3 meetings, but we also saw quite a push for an Indigenous and local communities advisory mechanism. So there's been a dedicated group of delegations that will work intersessionally on this proposal for establishing an advisory mechanism at the first COP. There's also the draft MOU with the JEF, which will be forwarded so that it can be considered by the the JEF Council, and returned to the UN member states that are parties to the BBNJ at COP1. So these are some of the key intercessional steps, what's intercessional work that's taking place as we get closer to COP1. I just wanted to kind of provide everything a little bit succinctly on one slide here, and this is the use of AI has helped. But I think these are some of the key actions that the first COP needs to take these decisions. So one, think about and adopt the core governance rules. Move forward with the establishment of a permanent secretariat. Ensure that the financial mechanism is secured. Really based on all the work that is done by the PrepCom, there's been a great amount of focus on the subsidiary bodies, its role and terms of reference, really launching the clearinghouse mechanism and setting the reporting and compliance framework. So it's vital to really see this COP1 as achieving these 6 priority areas and possibly more as we go through this year. There's been obviously some intercessional work, such as this advisory committee for the IPLCs that have been added to this list of things that the COP1 may be able to achieve. As I'm talking to a sectorally focused audience, I just want to kind of drive home a point that is worth making. I think, first of all, the BBNJ agreement is one of many international agreements that our countries, our communities need to manage, and there's sometimes overlap, sometimes direct and sometimes indirect impacts. And I think it's vital to understand that the BBNJ agreement should only be seen as something that is well, it needs to be something that is complementary, that is not undermining existing agreements, but also is enhancing the coordination and cooperation of member states and these instruments, frameworks, and bodies. So I think what's important to point out is the BBNJ agreement existing in this complex context is one that has the potential to deliver on UNCLOS and also help other regimes, because it may be able to provide certain means of implementation that might help countries meet their national and international obligations. If you think of a country like Seychelles with a vast economic exclusive zone, the same forms of means of implementation, whether it's capacity building, technology transfer, to some degree finance, the same issues that we're facing sometimes in our economic exclusive zone is also sometimes being faced in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So there should be understanding that there's a dual use here. So when we're thinking about fisheries, or we're thinking about the continental shelf, whether we're thinking about issues related to the CBD or to climate change, I think it's important to realize there's a lot of a mosaic here, and the BBNJ might be that glue that can fit between some of these regimes. I think it's also important to realize just in May, there was the 19th session of the UN Fish Stocks Agreements, informal consultations with states parties, which I think took place from May 21st to May 23rd. And the BBNJ was a particular focus in terms of its implications on RFMOs. So I won't go into to details that I'm sure others in this room can further unpack this. But I know with it, whether it's the UN Fish Stocks Agreements or the International Maritime Organization, there has been other instruments, frameworks, and body meetings that have been considering the BBNJ quite a lot. And I think that's essentially a good thing. And I think the more we can have these exchanges between various communities, the better when it comes to preparation. So with that said, I will end my presentation here, and thank you so much for your attendance. I hope I can answer your questions and discuss further. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that well-presented presentation. It was quite rich and intensive, and it starts giving me a feeling that there is much that can be discussed from what you have presented, which may not be adequately presented maybe through a webinar. Because my worry is how well are we prepared to engage in the process? Or are we waiting for the process to move ahead, and then at the end of it, we just say maybe the SWIO region, we are not included? So we need to really get to see how best we can engage in this, and especially to the commission that really matters, and especially when we look at like the clearinghouse mechanism. What is it? Who belongs there? And how can we be part of it as a region? So that's something we really need to start engaging early now and ask ourselves, how are we prepared to be able to be part of all that? We also have one, especially when we deal with the indigenous communities and the local communities and advisory mechanism. We need to know from the onset who are those that sit in it, how can we sit in it, how can we be part of it, and others. Because what I found is that, especially for the developing countries, we start by getting worried on the financing aspect. How will the process be financed? We may not be able to finance the process. But then we miss the point of putting ourselves on the table where decisions are made. And I think the question now I would have for you is, because you have been involved in this process, and by that will come later, is as the SWIO region, how are we engaging the process to make sure that we are part of it and not left by it, just wait for the implementation to come? So I think maybe when we come to question and answer, those are some of the things that we'll be looking at and get to see how well are we prepared, and also how are we prepared for the COP1 coming. Are we taking any steps, or we are just waiting to attend the meeting without having a position or a stand of what we'd want to get out of it? And what is the mechanism that we can use to really get to position that is clear for the SWIO region when it comes to COP1? I think those are important aspects that we all need to look into. So we'll discuss much more of that when we come to question and answer question. So for now, thank you very much for that. For now, I'd like to invite Bianca to tell us on the Allied Demos, the regional fisheries management organizations, for she has been involved in that. And we know these are the institutions that link us to the decision-making mechanism. And it also links the community and the individuals into the fishery sector. And Bianca, I know very well you have been involved in the IOTC meeting, so you know the process that have been going on there. And also the aspect of the BBNJ being part of the agenda of the IOTC meeting. And maybe probably the other regional bodies that exist, how are they engaging with this BBNJ? What does it mean to us? And why should we be concerned and involved in what decisions are being made and in these allied most? So I'll leave it to you for the presentation between 20 and 25 minutes. You are welcome to take us through your presentation. Bianca, welcome. The space is
Thank,
yours.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, John, for the kind introduction. And it was a great presentation by Jeremy. Thank you so much. And I think he presented a broader picture of BBNJ, and now we're going to dive into, okay, what does it mean for fisheries? And I think to disclaim, as a disclaimer to start with, I'm a fisheries person. So I have to confess I've actually never attended a BBNJ meeting. I've always observed it from the outside with thinking about how will it impact fisheries.
Bianca, we lost you.
Oh, sorry, you can't hear me or you can't see my slides?
Yes, come back.
I already
We
can
can see
see.
the thread, but we could not hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I already can hear.
Great. Thank you so much and apologize for that. So for my presentation over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about like what are fisheries management organizations already doing concerning BBNJ. Following that, we will talk specifically, okay, what is the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission doing, given that they had their 30th meeting like beginning of May. And also, I think I want to briefly touch on what does it mean for small-scale fisheries, given that this is like one of the key focuses of some of you working here. So when it comes to RFMO engagement, or like as Jerry mentioned in his slides, like IFBs, other international frameworks and bodies, so RFMOs are only one of many actually. But I think given that fisheries has such important implications for the marine ecosystem, it's quite important that they are part of it. So the relationship between BBNJ and RFMOs is guided by two principles, which have been enshrined into the BBNJ Agreement, and they are both equally important. So one is the not undermining existing organizations like RFMOs, and it's the one Jeremy also has alluded to, but the other one is also to promote coherency and coordination. And again, as Jerry mentioned, like BBNJ has the potential to kind of form as a platform for everyone to come together and to talk about issues which are much broader, like climate change, which address several other organizations as well. And I think it's quite important for us to remember that the member states who are part of the IATC or like various other regional organizations are also the member states which are attending BBNJ, unless they have not, of course, ratified it. But I think it's important to remember that it's not a different, we are still talking about more or less the same countries we find in the fishing space, and we find them now also in the BBNJ space. So generally, just to give you a big overview of what has been happened so far in the regional fisheries space, so we have seen that with the adoption of the BBNJ agreement, all RFMOs have started to engage with BBNJ. First, maybe a little bit reluctant, but I think I would say now the atmosphere is quite positive. At least this is my understanding. But then again, someone who comes from the conservation side might see that a bit differently. But in all RFMOs, the secretariats have been now tasked to attend BBNJ meetings. So they just couldn't go off and do their thing. They needed to have more or less formal recognition by the members to kind of say, okay, please go ahead and inform us what is happening there and report back. So the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission was actually quite innovative in that way, given that last year it was the first RFMO to adopt a non-binding measure on BBNJ, kind of like encouraging members to start dealing with this topic and acknowledging it's not going away, so we better get ahead of it and start engaging with it. And as John mentioned, like prepare ourselves so for what is coming in the future. Sorry, I don't know why my slides keep jumping. Following the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna has also followed suit and has also adopted a non-binding measure. And I think this year we saw like another step where the Indian Ocean is really innovative and has been like a champion in that space with the first adoption of a binding measure. And I will talk about this in a minute. But I think coming back, we talk about like RFMOs have to do A, B, and C, but at the end of the day, it is the member states. So we can't expect an RFMO to go to BBNJ and say anything. Even the secretariats can't really go and attend and express more than like a general view because they do not represent all their members. So for us to engage, it's really important to engage with the countries, with our own countries, to see how our own country can be a champion in that space. And as I've mentioned, there has been a growing level of engagement with the BBNJ process. So now having a little bit more of a deep dive, what happened in the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, like at the beginning of May. So as I've mentioned, the Indian Ocean was one of the first, it was the first time that a non-binding measure, a recommendation, how it's called, was adopted in 2025. This measure was put forward by the Maldives, first actually as a binding measure, but members at that time said, like, we are not ready for this. Happy with a non-binding measure, please come back next year. And the measure is actually quite simple. It just really says it encourages members to ratify and participate and more or less to engage with the BBNJ process. But then more specifically, it tasks the RFMO and the IATC Secretariat specifically to kind of engage with the BBNJ process and, if possible, to start establishing mechanisms for cooperation. So that gave the IATC Secretariat like a mandate to start attending BBNJ meetings, to start attending various things. And now at like this year's meeting, he came back and reported like, okay, this was what happened last year, or like at the various preparatory committees. And there's also like requirements of kind of to make use and provide information to the BBNJ clearinghouse mechanisms, now fully acknowledging that that mechanism has actually not been established. So at the 30th IATC Commission, so like beginning of May in the Maldives, and like from SWIO Tuna, Devon was there as well. So there was there was some attention and awareness about BBNJ. It has been mentioned. There was also a side event on BBNJ, which was hosted by Australia, the European Union, the Maldives, and Anchors. And it was really meant to be a space for countries to ask questions, because the people who attend an RFMO meeting are not the same people who, in most cases, are not the same people who attend the BBNJ meeting. And we have observed that there is like a disconnect at the national level. Like that in some countries, for example, as an example here from Australia, the BBNJ meeting and the BBNJ work is more or less led by the Environment Department and Foreign Affairs, whereas like our FMO work is led by the Fisheries Departments, and we have seen some lack of communication, let's say in this way, between those different departments. So sometimes people come to the RFMO meetings coming from the Fisheries Department, and they're not necessarily not very well aware about what is happening actually in the BBNJ space, because there's a lack of communication at the national level. And I think this is also quite an important aspect. So that was really a space for members to ask questions like, okay, what does it mean for us for fisheries? And there were quite a lot of questions regarding like, how will cooperation work? And especially like around science, whose science will be more relevant. So through the leadership from the Maldives, and then co-sponsored by the UK, there was another, now first time, a binding measure adopted, which was, it actually took the full 5 days of the meeting to get adopted. So it wasn't an easy win. And I will, in the next slide, talk about some of the issues or like some of the concerns some members expressed. But it didn't change much of the language around the participation of the countries, just similar. It is encouraging members, but it has now much more stricter language regarding the tasking for the IATC Secretariat. Again, to establish a mechanism to cooperate with the BBNJ Secretariat when the Secretariat has been established. And I think another important aspect is now that it has put BBNJ as a standing agenda item during Commission meetings. And for those of you who has been going to RFMO meetings, you're well aware that those meetings are very busy. There's a lot of things to discuss, and having a specific space to talk about BBNJ allows for greater engagement, because it can't be put aside because more important topics came up. It also has tasked the Commission to hold discussion and, if possible, take a position concerning proposals around area-based management tools like marine protected areas. And it has also encouraged members to undertake research in the IOTC area of competence, like in the Indian Ocean, and share that information with the IOTC community and the members quite broadly. So it was, I thought I was a bit surprised about some of the discussion points and some of the arguments brought forward by members. So even though most members agreed last year that they're happy to adopt a binding measure this year, some of them are still thinking it is a bit premature. And at one hand, you can also think about that it makes sense given that not all members of the IATC have yet ratified it. So it's for them a quite interesting spot to be in, like given that they have not even ratified BBNJ. Then one member in particular really expressed concerns regarding the protection of the rights of the adjacent coastal state, was really worried and wanted to see stronger wording, what it means, like, okay, that coastal states need to be included in anything when it related to BBNJ, especially when it comes to area-based management tools and marine protected areas. So important to note here that the BBNJ agreement does already have some language on that in their agreement. So there was the proponents were reluctant to address this concern within their proposal because it might look like ARFMOS are overstepping what they can say, and I started to interpret what BBNJ is saying, and we don't want to bring like any wrong perceptions. And I thought one of the aspects which I thought was one of the most interesting one was really the lacking mandate. As I've mentioned, the people are often from a different department. So the people who attend ARFMO meetings are from a different department, and some of them have expressed that they don't have the mandate to speak or make any decisions about BBNJ in the fisheries space. So they had to kind of communicate back to their capital, to the different national departments to can get of input of how they should proceed when it comes to BBNJ. And I think this is something really which needs to be done at the national level. At the same time, there are members who kind of encourages that fisheries-related experts and people from the fisheries department are starting to attend BBNJ meetings because we need this knowledge exchange. People who attend BBNJ need to learn more about fisheries, but fisheries need to learn more about BBNJ so that we are prepared and can respond to various queries. And of course, after the adoption, there was one member which was a little bit unhappy, and there were also still some concerns by NGO, noting that maybe ARFMOS have overstepped or made like a very strong case regarding the timeline again, kind of because it has been acknowledged that the IOTC timeline needs to be recognized. For example, like the commission meeting is once a year, it can't happen at several times, and we have to go through the IOTC established framework. So I think just to reflect on what does it mean for small-scale fisheries, given that BBNJ specifically says it deals only with areas beyond national jurisdiction, but I think nevertheless it has can have some implication for small-scale fisheries. So like I imagine if, for example, areas in the high seas have greater protection from various like industrial activities, it will have potentially a spillover effect for EEZs and even like territorial seas, which is like the space where a lot of the small-scale fishers operate. So there might be some positive implications, but then, as mentioned by one of the coastal states, one of the negative implications can be it can limit. At least that's what they see. It can limit the development aspiration of coastal states. For example, if some coastal states actually would like to transition their small-scale fishery into a more industrial-oriented fisheries and venture further out beyond the EEZ, that there might be limitations if there are like area-based management tools in place like marine protected areas. But I think many of you are actually the expert for small-scale fisheries, so I'm really curious to know what you think and what are your thoughts when it comes to the BBNJ small-scale fishery interaction. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and I apologize for the constantly jumping slides. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bianca, for also that well-thought presentation, and also giving us a highlight of what happened in the IOTC. We know this is a new area that IOTC is starting to focus on, but it also affects the area of its operation or area of its competence. So it's important also to start getting to see how we engage with the IOTC in connection to the small-scale fishers, because it affects us at the end of the day. Again, the key issue is how prepared are we? How much do we know about the process? And how much do we know about the linkages and interconnectedness of all those aspects and how they would affect our daily life as communities and small-scale fishers? So, and again, is how can we also participate positively in the decision making, and especially now that we are debating on how we engage with the BBNJ agreement. So that's also a challenge to many of us who are working with the NGO sector or civil society sector, because we also need to know how well do we engage with the process, so that when time comes for us to really engage, again, we are not left out, because this is the right time to engage with the process when things are being put in place. And with that, I think we'll be able to be in a position to get well-informed decisions that will be useful to us and to the small-scale fisheries. I would still want to add the listeners to really put the questions on the chat. And also for those who joined later, we agreed that we maybe introduce ourselves by writing our names, the organization that we come from, and the country we come from, possible. So with that presentation, I would want to give apologies from Dr. Makira. He was not able to join. He's very busy with the ocean conference coming. But I hope next time, maybe when we hold this, I think we'll need to get to know what individual countries are doing to be able to engage in this process. And with that, we'll be able to know how all the sectors now, the allied most and the countries are engaging in the process. So I want to open this question and answer session. But before we open the question and answer session, I want to alert the participant that at the end of it, we are going to post a QR for a short survey. Please, this survey helps us to get to see how we can improve on this webinar, and also get to know how we can better engage with relevant bodies. So it's important that you're part of the process and you fill up the short survey. So I open space for questions. You can raise your hand if you have questions to ask, and we get them answered by our presenters. Thank you.
John, can I already jump in? I saw a question by Benedict Kilo.
Yes.
So Benedict asked whether the BBNJ agreement have directly implement cushion mechanisms for small-scale fisheries, where they occur, and whether there's a way to address them in the preparatory committee. And I might just start talking, and maybe Jeremy can add something on it, given he's much more aware about what happens at the BBNJ process. But to my understanding, given that small-scale fisheries mainly occur within the national space, there is not really, BBNJ has not really acknowledged them, or like has not really provide specific consideration for them. I think if there needs to be any consideration regarding small-scale fisheries, needs to really be done through the national levels, like through the country itself. At least this is my understanding. So, Jeremy, please correct me if I'm wrong or if there's anything you have to add.
No, thanks, Bianca. I think I can add, but definitely not correcting. I think definitely add in that, yeah, nothing specific. Where we might need to see proactiveness and consideration at the national level, at a regional level, is within. I can think of at least two specific instances when it comes to BBNJ implementation. I think the consultations for the establishment of marine protected areas or an areas-based management tools are one that really dictate a lot of consultations with various stakeholders. And I think it would be on the part of the proposing country or a group of countries to have consultations with small-scale fishers. So I think they would be one of the stakeholders potentially identified. But yeah, that's about really understanding the ecological connectivity between what they are fishing and what's 200 nautical miles. So I think that's maybe one area. And I think the other element might be underneath the environmental impact assessments. Again, this is just thinking about what impacts other activities that may be taking place in areas beyond national jurisdiction may have on activities in economic exclusive zones. So it's not just one, it's what happens in EEZ and what happens in ABNJ. There is this interaction that I think the BBNJ understands, and what environmental impact assessments may take place that again might need the consideration of small scale fishes. But I think, yeah, as you've pointed out, the national level and the coordination of the departments involved, whether that's environment, blue economy, it could be finance and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Attorney General's office, all these kind of whole government approach with these departments in mind, and where small scale fishers make their voices heard is important there.
Thank you. I see Winfred Aure, your hand is up. You take that and then come to Doreen. Wilfred?
Thank you very much, Kareko, and thank you very much, presenters. The topic is very important, but I've got a few comments here or views. One is we should know who are the stakeholders to BBJN, and then is BBJN, is it really a priority to each of the stakeholders? And in this case, we really need to convince the politicians, as you put forth. Meetings are attended by fisheries experts, maybe from different sectors. So in this case, I think there's a great need to convince the politicians, the administrators, really, and the way to convince them is really to tell them that the economic advantage of BBJN is greater than their worries. And for this case, I would rather also suggest that if it's possible, let us unpack the contents of the BBNJ in a user-friendly language, so that as many stakeholders get to understand it. Otherwise, thank you very much, Bianca. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you very much, Kareko.
Okay, thank you very much, Haure, and for that, because I feel maybe the Tanzanians are the ones who introduced the terminology of the open waters as Shamba Bibi in one of the past meetings we had. And that showed how relevant it is for us to start focusing on the open waters, especially when you're dealing with BBNJ. So at local level, I think it's also important for people to come together from a local perspective and look at how BBNJ can affect each individual country. And then from there now, that's where now I think you start taking call on the simple language of what does BBNJ mean for each individual country, and how are they going to gain from it, and what is their relevant key stake to hold when it comes to BBNJ. But I open it to the two presenters. If there's someone, Jeremy, you have something to say, please.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate those comments and align with the questions of who the stakeholders are and if this is a priority. And maybe as I do that, I also might be able to answer some of your questions at the start. John, I think you had mentioned some questions in the beginning. So I think when we talk about priority, I think this is what we need to look at as Africans, as people in East and Southern Africa. There are so many other issues affecting our countries and our communities at present, whether it's the Strait in Hormuz, inflation, various other crises that are near us or getting closer to us. And I think it's interesting to think about priorities, especially and not just at a sectorial level, but really thinking about it sometimes bilaterally and in a multilateral setting. I think as we get into it and thinking again a bit about the regional perspective of things, it's important to realize that I think I just did a quick count now of the SWIO member states that have either ratified and become a party to the agreement or are signatory or have not yet engaged in the BBNJ agreement. There's only currently two members of the SWIO commission that really have not signed. The rest have either signed or are party. And when we think about parties, 6 out of the 11 are parties. So that's important to realize. And I think when you look at the IOTC as well, it's not unfamiliar. It's a quite similar situation where you've got almost 50% of its members are parties, and almost 80% are signatories. So I think when we look at that, we have to understand that these countries that make up these commissions, these regional organizations, how they communicate, how they talk to each other is important. And I think, as Bianca has pointed out quite a few times, which is really well pointed out, is the fact that these are the same countries going to the BBNJ, raising objections, proposing way forwards, but it's not always the same people. And how much our people exchange information, coordinate to be consistent, aligns with should align with our priorities that we're either representing from a local to national to regional level. But also sometimes when we think bilaterally, I think what to point out a little bit, and I think it's kind of underlined by the bidding for the secretariat of the BBNJ, is the fact that you've got a country like China in such a space. And I think the influence of China is, as a P5 member, as a great bilateral trading partner and supporter of African countries, is something to consider. So some African countries, I think, will need to consider Belgium within the EU, China as its own, powerful country. In thinking about these priorities, I think that's something to really bear in mind as we go for it. And I think what's also important to realize in terms of thinking about how we prepare for COP1, how we start looking at where we are and where we need to be. I totally agree with what you said, John, about, yes, financing can be at the top of our mind, but it should not distract us from all these other things that are taking place. I think when we look at our region, we have the benefit of having UNEP and several other UN bodies in Nairobi, for instance, with the Nairobi Convention actually working quite well, I think, with WIOMSA and some other regional bodies. There's a great amount of technical expertise there that I think should be leveraged and really brought together across different regions. I was recently in Seychelles attending a World Maritime University workshop that really focused on the domestic implementation agreement with about, I think, 6 or 7 countries in the region. And I think these workshops on the ground are very important to kind of exchange best practices, but look at what are we doing with our laws back home? Are we changing things a particular way? Are we putting resources in a certain way? These are important. I think I would also mention that through IUCN and several other organizations that have a regional presence, there are resources. There's a technical assistance facility, a 10 million euro fund that the European Union has put forward to help countries work on these. And so there's proposals that countries and groups of countries can make, as well as opportunities for technical experts, for consultants to help those countries prepare for certain things like COP1 and what goes after that. So I think there are resources that are there, but I don't know if we're fully utilizing these resources yet. There's also quite a lot of interest from philanthropic organizations and such. So I think these are ways in which we identify who is interested, who has a priority of this issue, and how do they want to support us. And I think at the end of the day, it's important to also come with our own agenda. How does this relate to our bilateral issues? How does this relate to our national issues? Because everybody else who's involved have their own priorities as well. So we need to find that alignment. And where we find alignment, maybe we find a way forward, but where we don't find alignment, we make sure to preserve our interests and others can preserve theirs. I would just summarize it like that, but I think those comments are excellent, and yeah, appreciate the discussion.
Thank you very much for that deep explanation. And I think I picked that we have some resources that exist. And the question that we may have now is, how are we taking advantage of the existing resources to be able to prepare ourselves better? And I think that we will be adding some. Bianca, you have something to add on that? If not, then Doreen, your hand was up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jeremy and Bianca, for the insightful discussions. However, I note that that is not my hand. It's just that I had used my registration link and shared in our WhatsApp group, and a number of people joined using that. So you note there are a lot of Doreens. So if you are the Doreen that raised your hand, please. So just feel free to ask your question.
Doreen, I thought
I don't know
cloning
which
was not
Doreen.
real. I'm realizing it's
I'm
now
even
real.
wondering. I'm wondering, is that?
Okay. Okay, fine.
I don't know. It's not
As the
me.
person come up, the hand is still up.
Yeah. But there's a question I see on the chat box now that I'm on the floor from Naima.
Yes, please.
She's asking, as an artisanal fisher engaged in coastal fisheries, and I'm interested in how BBNJ implementation will connect to small-scale fishing communities. I think she's asking, how is BBNJ connected to small-scale fishers?
Okay, who is ready to take? I think this Bianca looks like you, but I think this is also coming up quite much that the small scale fishers who really want to get to know how they are connected to the BB&J and how they can engage in the process. And maybe as you are answering that, you would also maybe need to know, especially for us who deal with the tuna fisheries, would maybe want to know how BBLJ decisions may affect tuna fisheries management, especially in the Indian Ocean region. So maybe you can combine that, Bianca.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much, Neema, for that question. And I think it's also like linked to what Benedict Kilo asked, and he made a really good comment, and as based on what Jeremy said, like it's all about the connectivity in that way. I think the way how BBNJ implementation will connect to small scale fishing community will be through the national countries, but also like what happens out there and out on the high seas and how the impact will be felt potentially by small scale fisheries. But the thing is like we don't know yet, so it's hard to make any judgments on that, especially like I'm not a small scale fisheries expert, so I think that way would really rely on your kind of expertise. But at the national level, I think it's really important for coastal fisheries to engage with the respective countries to start the dialogue. And I think we had like a really good question by Howler. So like, who are the stakeholders? And I would say like small scale fisheries, community fisheries, artisanal fisheries are important stakeholders. And I think that needs to be ideally the government of your respective country start to engage with like representatives, but also vice versa. If there's ways to engage with your government, I think that's a really important space to do so, to express your concerns and your way forward, what you think in that way. Regarding John's question, like how can BBNJ impact IUTC? So I think in the end of the day, when it comes to fishery specific, it is the ITC which has the power who has the mandate to manage fisheries. So it is the ITC who will say, who makes the final decision when it comes to fisheries. However, so there's a lot of uncertainty still around how BBNJ will work, given it has not yet been fully implemented. So I assume, and this is based on my personal thoughts around this whole topic, that, for example, like a country who will propose a marine protected area, for example, will ideally start proposing and familiarizing that and start consultation of that proposal with the RFMOs first on, and not just the RFMOs, but also with the adjacent coastal states, and in that way the respective stakeholders like small-scale fisheries. So like very hypothetically, for example, if there is an MPA outside on the high seas adjacent to Kenya and Tanzania, you would kind of hope that the respective proponent tables this proposal to the IATC, but at the same time has started a dialogue with Kenya and Tanzania and the respective stakeholders regarding this proposal to get input, to learn about how would this proposal impact and influence you. And that will happen, and that should happen ideally before that proposal is even put forward at the BBNJ space. So otherwise, you will put it forward and then everyone has to, it just takes a long time. We all know in the IATC, yes, we would like the timelines to be different, but the IATC has been in place for 30 years. It's not going to change how it works now for someone, a new agreement. So in an ideal case scenario, that proponent will already start the dialogue with the respective countries and the communities. So I think in that way, there's a lot of space, or there's a lot of potential for communities and for stakeholders to engage with the various BBNJ processes. For example, especially like, I think one of the greatest implications will be like marine protected areas where there will be the greatest overlap with fisheries. And there is a lot of potential, even enshrined in the BBNJ Convention, that there needs to be consultation at every potential level with the relevant organizations, with the relevant coastal adjacent coastal states, and various stakeholders of those coastal states. So I actually see that there's a lot of potential for everyone to engage with BBNJ through the processes, and especially when it comes to fisheries. Thank you. And I hope that responded to some of your questions. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Bianca, for the answer given, satisfactory. But I see a gap there with maybe the feedback mechanism from the BBNJ agreement and how that filters back to the local communities and the small-scale fishers. So, and I think that's a gap that maybe the civil society and the respective government agencies really need to take in and get to see how we are able to communicate easily and be informed of what is happening, and also the understanding of the process, so that at least from grassroots, we really get to see how we fit into the system. But as time is going, I would also maybe want to ask Jeremy on the role the regional bodies. We are band of African Union, and I think this is really a strong agreement that we feel regional bodies like African Union need to really come in and get us engaging into this agreement as a continent, not just individual countries. I'm not sure what role it's playing at the moment. We also have like the Nairobi Convention, what role is it playing? And we also have other regional bodies, especially also thinking on how will it be implemented from maybe a more larger regional level. Because you look at like European Union can usually work as a bloc. But for us, we work as individual countries, which does not give us much strength. So for this BBNJ, especially the African Union, where is it taking us? Jeremy,
No, great question,
perspective.
John. Great question. I don't know if I can answer specifically where the AU is at now, but I think the beginning of my answer kind of starts with a comparison with the European Union. And, as I said, the EU is, as an organization, so regional economic integration organization, is a party to the BBNJ agreement. And this is very much within, the usual way in which the EU has a mandate to represent its member states within these such treaties, such environmental treaties. As far as I know, the AU isn't set up as such. It is a organization that obviously is meant to represent African interests, but I think it's not as if the African states that make up the AU have given the AU this mandate. I should say, though, the AU has played a role, I think specifically during the intergovernmental conference period, the 2018 to 2023, and to some extent again within the PrepCom process. So I know, at least through the AU's observer mission to the UN, as well as the law council. I'm forgetting the legal council of the AU has also played a role. But there's several different branches of the AU that could come in here, and I think that's where the issue becomes. It's about member states during key decision making moments at the AU to really give a mandate to one or more agencies within the AU to take this on. The legal commission, the office of the legal counsel has had quite a good role in providing, I think, negotiating recommendations, advice. The AU mission has this role at the UN, but now if we're talking about implementation, if we're talking about all these other things, I think the member states must meet and really provide a decision of how the AU will take things forward. That is essential. I think there are issues with the AU that are larger than the BBNJ that may prevent us from doing this, though. So I think that's important to think about. And I think what the AU can do, at least, and I think we have to understand that there are several regions within the African group that need to be represented, as well as different types of countries. But I think we need to look at groups and regions like those of Eastern and Southern Africa. I think we have quite a strong concentration of expertise. And even going back to the previous question, which I think what came to mind a little bit is this clearinghouse mechanism, and what role it has to be when it comes to dealing with small scale fishes. You've got the Nairobi Convention that has a clearinghouse mechanism already, right? How well has it done in our region when we're thinking about particular stakeholders, and how much can something like what the Nairobi Convention, in terms of its work, how much can it help other regions and have other regions deal with their issues when it comes to BBNJ? I think this is what the African Union, working with such organizations, has the ability to do, is really pass around the best practices from one particular area of strength within the continent to others. So I think that's one area that you can think about it. The other area I think might also be representation. These subsidiary bodies, which are essential to the implementation of the BBNJ agreement, are being seen as having regional representation. So the 5 UN regional groups. And so Africa is going to have quite significant representation across these bodies. So I think the AU could have quite a significant role working with its member states in figuring out who these people are. And as I say this, I think it's important to realize that, again, whether it's a former minister or whoever, technical expert, whoever's going to be playing these key roles in these subsidiary bodies should be representing their communities or the science in terms of their perspective. I'm not talking necessarily a particular issue, but thinking about a maybe sectoral or technical background, how much they can bring to the science and technical STB, scientific and technical body, or to the capacity building and transfer of marine technology committee, how much they can bring from their knowledge and experience to these committees will be essential to the implementation. Lastly, there's going to be issues around the COP1 that I think are really important for us to start thinking about. Who will be the COP1 president? Where will they come from? Would it be great to have potentially an African woman who has a background in fisheries or in conservation and sustainable use? I think there's going to be various leaders throughout these processes that I think it's important for the AU and others to start thinking about. And I think, but we always have to remember, it's our member states. Our member states make up these large organizations, and they need to really drive them and say, this is a priority. We are very interested in this. We need to bring on others. In my time at IUCN, I know we've engaged several countries to champion this issue, but it all comes back to the national level of priority that they put into it. So I think that's maybe the beginning of an answer there. I hope it's adequate for now.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that. And I think you have brought out the element of maybe the role of the civil society in this and other stakeholders, maybe to really look for the leverage point at areas for engagement and get to know, engage with individual countries on what areas they didn't need to push in for them to position themselves in a way that will benefit from the process and also be part of the process. And this now trickle into also a more greater understanding on what BBNJ is and how it would affect us. I thank you, but I don't see any other hand. So I would think everybody is okay with the presentations and the answers given. For me, I would, as we come to a close, I would want to thank you, Jeremy, for creating time to be with us and for the nice presentation. I know it takes time, and I know you love this process. From the time I got to know you through this process, I know we have had a journey. Bianca, sorry for getting you to be with us at this particular moment. I know in Australia, is other hours of the night, but thank you very much for being there. And we have also benefited from that. And I know Anchors has been working on this, and I would think that it will be helpful for us to continue working together to get to see that we as the Southwestern Indian region, we understand exactly what BBNJ is and engage positively with the process so that we are part of it. So with that, I would say thank you, and I want maybe to request those that can put on their camera for a group photograph. I think it will be welcome, and the phone, I think you do the necessary so that we are able to see how well we are working regionally and how we will move ahead in our dialogues to make sure that we are ended somewhere when it comes to the implementation of BBNJ. Let not be like other agreements where we are just implementers and not part of the decision makers. Thank you. So if you can put your photographs in the next 3 seconds, I think we'll be happy with that. For those that can, it's not compulsory. We will appreciate.